Welcome back in, everybody. Another edition here of Thursdays with Phillip here on the Auburn Undercover podcast. Phillip Marshall is here as always. Ronnie Sanders, our publisher, joins us. And Phillip, it is that time of year. All of a sudden, we're into SEC play. Auburn opens their conference schedule this Saturday afternoon against Arkansas. And we'll be seeing a bunch of familiar faces there on the sideline wearing Razorback red instead of orange and blue. You wrote about Bobby Petrino this week. I'd forgotten Marcus Woodson is also on that staff, so is Scott Fountain. But the one that, people are kind of excited to see because he coordinates their defense, and seeing him go against Auburn's offense is Travis Williams, who was an Auburn Tiger for quite some time, and now for the first time in his career, he'll be on the other sideline.
Yeah, first, I hadn't thought about those other guys either, Scott Fountain in particular. I think Scott Fountain and Travis have something in common in that neither one of them wanted to leave Auburn. And both of them loved it here. But in the case of Scott, Gus Malzahn wanted to make some changes, and I think he had an opportunity to stay in a lesser role, but I don't think he was interested in that. And of course, Brian Harsin didn't retain Travis, who also wanted to stay. But speaking of Travis Williams, he's one of my favorite Auburn stories in that he played middle linebacker on a team that went 13-0 and made all SEC at 205 pounds. That seems almost impossible, but he sure did it. And I think one of the interesting things about Travis is that Joe Whitt told me this story. Joe Whitt recruited him in Columbia, and he was not at all highly recruited. And Joe actually went up there to tell him that they weren't going to be able to offer him. And he said that he went to his house and just the whole vibe of the house, how well taken care of it was, and another conversation with Travis, he changed his mind. And Auburn offered him. He became an all-SEC linebacker on a great team and a great linebacker to get on. And he played, what was it, 3 years, maybe 2 years with the Atlanta Falcons.
Couple years
at 205 pounds. It's interesting how those things happen sometimes. But Travis, in interest of full disclosure, he's one of my favorite guys that has come through Auburn as an assistant coach. And he and I have, I hope, a very good relationship. And I thought it was at the time, it was a real mistake by Brian Harsin not to retain him. And that's even before I knew much about Brian Harsin. But he's obviously done well, and he's Travis told me Travis and Joe Whitt are extremely close. And Travis told me, I guess probably during his next to last year at Auburn, that in his words, I could Joe Whitt this thing and be perfectly happy, meaning stay for basically his whole adult life. And it's really unfortunate that he wasn't able to do that, because that's what he wanted to do beyond, unless there was obviously a possibility to be head coach. And this will be his first trip back to Jordan-Hare Stadium as an opposing coach. And I'm sure he'll be excited. And I'm not sure how much difference that makes. I was talking to Ronnie at lunch today and about the fact that, you better be excited about preparing for every game if you're an SEC defensive coordinator. So, and I know he is, but this was still, I'm sure he's had a little extra pep in his step this week, and his players know it. And but he was pretty beloved by Auburn people, and I think that he will be excited. I'll just put it that way. And I'm sure Pat Dye told me, not told me, said at the press conference after the 1982 Alabama game that I would have been okay if I'd never beaten Coach Bryant. And I think Travis is probably the same way. He'd probably just as soon not have to coach against Auburn. But he has a job to do, and I'm sure he'll do it, and it's going to be quite interesting.
You mentioned having to play, Travis having to come back to Auburn. I remember, when we got fired with Terry, and we all ended up at LSU. Well, Jimbo and Pete Jenkins and Trickett and me, and I remember it was really emotional coming back. And none of those three guys they loved it at Auburn, but they weren't graduates. And I remember it was really it was emotional for me coming back, and I know for a fact it was really emotional for Pete Jenkins because I saw him in tears on the sideline before the game, and it was his wife, Pete Jenkins' wife, went to Auburn, and he told me one time he said there's one time in my life that I took a job without talking to her, and it was this one. He
didn't want, he was not, when Tuberville didn't retain him, he was hurt.
He was.
And I think he was hurt because, Pete he's got some purple and gold pumping through his veins.
Some?
But he was so happy to get to Auburn because it meant Donna got to get to Auburn, his wife. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why he was hurt, though knowing that's the nature of the business. Tuberville had his defensive line coach, and that's who he was going to hire, regardless of who was there. But I'm sure it's emotional. I'm sure it's very emotional. But emotions can work two ways if you're not careful.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Yeah, that's what Pittman said today. He said last year he was motivated too. He was plenty motivated about facing Auburn for the first time, and that didn't work out too well.
No, it didn't. And I'm sure that stuck in his craw too, getting beat 48-10. But, in the end, it comes down to players on the field executing. I mean, Travis has no secrets that somebody else doesn't have. He's not going to unleash on something on Auburn. Now, he may have some wrinkles that they haven't seen Arkansas run before, but he's not going to have some secret, just like either it's Hugh Freeze or DJ Durkin or anybody else. I mean, there's not many secrets out there anymore. So it comes down to players executing. That's what it'll come down to this Saturday. And I think it's going to be a heck of a game.
What do you think about, and it's a little bit off topic, I know, but what are your thoughts on Bobby Petrino's return to Auburn?
Well, I wrote about it the other day. I don't know that it'll be an emotional thing for him. I mean, he was only at Auburn for 1 year. And now he did do everything he could to get the job when Gus was hired.
No question.
But that wasn't going to happen and couldn't happen that soon after him getting fired at Arkansas for cause. I mean, it just couldn't. And but I'm told he was disappointed. But it's funny because I had a very good rapport and relationship with Bobby Petrino when he was at Auburn and after. And I think it seems to me I'm the only person that likes him. Best I can tell. So
I liked him for a while, and then he turned out to be Bobby Petrino.
Yeah. Well, but I'm I think I know that when he left Auburn and Tuberville made a mistake, not by hiring not by naming Hugh Freeze offensive coordinator, or even hiring Steve Ensminger to call the plays. Because those are both guys are really good coaches. Steve Ensminger, coaches in the business will tell you, is as good as it gets, or was when he was coaching. because he could coach really almost any position. But he also told them that they had to run Petrino's offense. And Petrino's offense was then at least quite different than anybody else's offense. And Steve Ensminger told me, he said, look, we can call the same plays. He said, that's not an issue. He said, but when something goes wrong, we don't know how to fix it.
That's right.
And Hugh told me, Hugh Nall told me that he said, if I had it to do over, I wouldn't have accepted it. He said, but how do you not accept it? He said, but I shouldn't have. And with 2 games left in the season, but Alabama game and the bowl game, Hugh, after they lost to Georgia, went in the meeting room and erased all the plays off the blackboard and said, we're going to do it my way. And they won both games and scored 28 points in both games. But so he claims to this day that he averaged 28 points a game as offensive coordinator.
I think isn't he running a trucking company now in Georgia somewhere?
Yeah,
is that right?
Yeah, I think he's done very well.
Good for him.
He's a big Georgia supporter, which is obviously not surprising. He played there and played on the national championship team in 1980. 80, yeah.
80.
Another good guy, though, really good guy. And but the coaching business, as you know, Ronnie, from your time in it, it's a rough and tumble world.
It is indeed. It's like we've said before, 2 kinds of coaches: those that have been fired and those that are going to be.
Yeah.
Phillip, talk about Hank Brown and his family and his first start at Auburn. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I have had 2 really, really good conversations with Hank Brown's dad, and he is a really good guy. And Hank laughs him out. I did a pretty in-depth story on Hank right after he was named the backup, and I talked to his daddy for the first time then, and Hank said that his daddy's, he said, he's a good quarterback dad. He doesn't try to get involved in these kinds of things. And then his dad told me, he said, I played soccer. He said, I don't know what he's supposed to do. Hank's older brother was also a quarterback and played at UT Chattanooga. And the interesting part of that was in that story. He chose to leave UT Chattanooga to move to Auburn and enroll at Auburn and live with Hank. And I thought that was really impressive. And then he told me, he said, well, plus my girlfriend and now my fiance goes to school here too. And I said, now we're getting down to the nitty gritty of this situation. And but Hank, he really is. He just comes across as such a guy, level-headed guy that just is not going to get torn up by whatever the circumstances are. He wasn't planning on being the starting quarterback at all. He and Peyton are very close friends, and but he never looked the least bit rattled out there last Saturday. Even when at the few times when things weren't going well on offense in the rain in the second quarter, he still didn't look rattled. He seems to be very bright, and you can't help but be impressed with him when you sit down and talk with him. And I don't think he'll be rattled Saturday either. That doesn't mean it's going to be a whole completely different situation than what he faced last Saturday. I mean, it's SEC defense with SEC players and SEC coaches, and they're going to try their best to confuse him and shake him up. And I don't believe he'll get rattled. That doesn't mean he can't be confused by what they're doing on defense. But Travis loves blitz. And I guarantee you they're going to try their best to light him up and see how he responds to that.
Yeah, I
But
certainly.
I think he'll respond fine because I think he's smart. I think he'll know the plan and know where he's supposed to go with the ball and know where he's supposed to go with the ball if the blitz is coming.
Philip, how do you see the rest of the team, including Hank Brown, performing in first SEC game of the season?
I don't know. I mean, I really don't. I think that I mean the defense obviously had a rough day, or for sure a rough 2 quarters last Saturday against New Mexico, who is a pretty good offensive team.
Well,
Uh,
Marco Mendenhall is nothing to.
no, he's a
He's
good coach, and they
he's a
had a
pretty good
week
coach.
off and all those things. But there was still there was some busted coverages, and that can't happen. But the thing that I noticed the most was guys having receivers covered and then being unable to find the ball. And that's got to get fixed. And I'm sure they've worked hard on fixing those things. But the biggest thing, if you're going to slow down Bobby Petrino's offense, first and foremost, you better stop him from running. Because if they can run, then it's going to be really dangerous. And I'm sure Arkansas will score some points. But I believe Auburn's defense will play better. And the whole key to the offense to me is can Auburn run the ball effectively? Because that's when they really started rolling Saturday. Was when they were able to run the ball. And every quarterback that's ever played will tell you that if you got a good running game, that's a big help in the passing game. So I expect Auburn's mission will be to stop the run first, and I expect Arkansas's mission will be to stop the run first. And
Yeah, it's really interesting to me. I mean, last year Petrino was at Texas A&M, and I think Philip, you and I had this conversation a number of times. I'm not sure that either of us thought that Bobby Petrino and Jimbo Fisher working together was going to work. Having known both of them quite a while,
that situation was entirely predictable.
Completely.
I mean, it was entirely predictable. And I said, I don't know why. I mean, Jimbo, I can't believe that Jimbo purely on his own decided that Bobby Petrino was his answer. I just don't believe that. And if he was under pressure to do it, I mean, the guy had what he got, $75 million buyout.
Mm-hmm.
I'm honestly surprised that he didn't tell him, pay me or leave me alone.
Well, I think they were. I think they were about at that point. Obviously, they were.
Yeah, but it's interesting. Coaches in general. I mean, Jimbo became a great coach when he had Jameis Winston, and after he had Jameis Winston, he wasn't as great anymore. Gus Malzahn, his offensive coordinator, Gene Chizik as the head coach. They were great coaches when they had Cam Newton. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's so much depends on that, and Jimbo knew that, which is why he blew off some pretty serious accusations against Jameis Winston at Florida State. But then the program just crashed
and burned, and it still hasn't recovered.
No, and to me, and Jimbo, look, I've known Jimbo since 1993, and he and I have always gotten along. He used to break Saban's rules when he was at LSU and talk to me the week before Auburn and LSU played. And I think he was just assumed Saban probably wouldn't see it. But something happened, and I don't know what. I was totally shocked by his, I don't know what word to use, the way he acted at the national championship game. I mean, he had nothing good to say about Auburn, and nothing good before the game, and he had nothing good to say about Auburn after the game.
It was really pretty amazing. I mean, as much as Auburn meant to him, and he was there for 6 years.
Well, listen, he told me numerous times that his number one, if his career would go the way he wanted it to, he would be the head coach at Auburn.
And he
And
had
the
that
fact
chance
is, he could have been. He
very
could
much.
have been. He was their first choice. It wasn't that it became between Kirby Smart and Gus Malzahn, but Jimbo Fisher was their first choice,
No
and he
question.
blew them off
100%.
for whatever reason. I have no idea what that reason was.
Well, and you and I had
Uh,
this conversation when it was going on, but I mean, I got a call from someone on the search committee, if you remember, and it said, "Who would you hire?" And I said, "I'd hire Jimbo." And then this is after, and there's a whole story there we can talk about on another day. But
yeah,
after Jimbo turned it down, he called me back and he said, "Well, who would you hire?" I said, "Hell, I've already told you I'd hire Jimbo." And he said, "Well, Jimbo turned us down. Where would you go now?" We talked about different names.
turned them down through. Didn't you get Rick Trickett to call him or somebody?
He got Sexton called him after they talked to Jimbo, and then everything was good. They offered him the job, all that stuff, and he went underground. Didn't call him back, and long story short, I finally got him to call him back. Sexton, I think, called him back, and he backed out, and then that's when it came down to Kirby and Gus. And if you remember, they interviewed. Let's see, they interviewed to begin with. It was Jimbo, and then after Jimbo turned it down, they interviewed Chad. They interviewed Chad Morris too, if I remember right. And I Nathan, you weren't around then, but I called Phillip and I said, "Hey, I got some news," and he said, "I said they interviewed Chad Morris." He's like, "I'm not going to write that." He's like, "I can't write that."
I really believe, though technically they were interviewing for the head coaching job, I really believe Gus wanted him. I really believe that was their plan. And then I think they were not impressed when they interviewed.
If you remember, I had one source, and then I got another call from somebody else, and I said, "Well, if you remember, the story goes, I called you and I said, hey, they interviewed Chad Morris." He said, "I'm not writing that." I said, "Well, listen," I said, "let me get another source." Let me get another source. I said, "If I get another source, then we got to write it." And so I got another source, and we wrote it. And my God, it was not popular.
Well, that goes back to the Chiswick search. The search that ended up with hiring Gene Chiswick. And I'm not going to say who, obviously, but a member of the committee that was flying around the country was calling me every night when he got home. And he said, I said, "Well, what'd y'all do today?" He said, "Well, we interviewed Gene Chiswick." I said, "Why?" He said, "I think he's in it." And you got to remember, Gene Chiswick was on a 10-game losing streak, and most of those 10 games were non-competitive.
15-29, right? Or was it 5-20?
5-29.
5-29. There you go.
And anyway, and of course, it turned out, and we reported first that Gene Chiswick was going to get the job, and guys on other sites going on their message board saying, no, that's wrong. That's wrong. That's not happening. And I just laughed because I knew it was happening. And
it did.
I mean, I guess you'd have to say it worked out all right because he hired Gus and got Cam. And then Gus, Gus deserves credit for having 8 consecutive winning seasons and for going to the championship game and for going to 2 SEC championship games. That's pretty good.
Well, and if you look at that the Chiswick hire, I mean, like you said, Auburn got a national championship out of it, an SEC championship, and then Chiswick gets fired, and the next year you get another SEC championship and a chance to play for a championship, national championship. So, I think even as bad as what was the year 2012, as bad as 2012 was, I think that looking back, I think most Auburn people would keep things the way that they were.
Well, think about 2012. That team was just such a wreck, and it was not without good players.
No.
It was not. Now look, they probably would not have done what they did if they had not signed Nick Marshall. But they would have still been a lot better than they were in 2012. And we're getting kind of off the subject here now.
Well, I know we are, but I kind of like it. So, it's interesting if Jimbo had said yes.
Where would we be today? Who knows?
Where would we be today? And I think they were willing to give Jimbo, full control of the program, which is something that hadn't happened.
Right. And here's the thing that gets lost in the whole Kirby Gus debate. Because people have come up with all kind of bogus reasons why they didn't offer it to Kirby. They were ready to give Kirby that same thing. That was not the issue. There was really only one issue, which was that he wanted to coach in the national championship game, and Jay just would not have it. And which I personally think was a really, really bad mistake, because Auburn would have been all over the national championship game for a week. And I don't know.
I tend to. I'm kind of splitting the difference. I could see where Jay is coming from. I'm not sure that anywhere else in America, other than maybe Michigan and Ohio State, that it would matter, but it matters here, as you know. I think that would have been a hard look. And if the success had followed Kirby to Auburn, the way it has at Georgia, and I'm not sure it would, by the way.
No, that's I tell you what, Kirby and Georgia, Kirby being a Georgia guy, what Kirby knew was that there was no reason for Georgia not to have everything, because they had the state they're in and all those things. And he inherited good players and had a bad season with those good players to start off with in 2016. But I think probably, I know Kirby would say that it worked out the best, obviously. And I'm not sure that he could have done that at Auburn. I'm just not sure. Maybe so. But here's the problem. Georgia can dominate the state of Georgia in recruiting. Auburn can sign given players from the state of Georgia, but Auburn can't dominate the state of Georgia in recruiting.
That's right.
And they can't dominate the state of Alabama either.
No.
They pretty much did this year, I guess, or have so far. The thing about Auburn, the great thing about Auburn is that it's right here surrounded by players. Georgia, Florida, even Mississippi. I mean, there's a lot of players in Auburn's footprint. And but Auburn is not the power in any of those places. Anyway, Auburn can't dominate. They're not going to be the dominant recruiting power in Florida. They're not going to be the dominant recruiting power in Georgia. Some places in Alabama, and maybe even some places in West Georgia. But for the most part, that's not the case. But there's a whole bunch of good players. Auburn has beaten a lot of Georgia teams for a lot of years with a lot of players that Georgia didn't want.
Well, and you look, I mean, Auburn's really those top 6 schools that have won all the championships since the 60s. Auburn's 63. Really the only one. What's that?
63.
Yeah, Auburn's the only one that's not the state school.
Right.
It's pretty impressive.
Oh, it is, and I think sometimes people don't, jealousy runs rampant in college football, and I've had people ask me if Alabama can do it, then Auburn can do it. Well,
not the same thing.
If you're talking about long term, it's not the same thing. Just look at history of all the schools situated like Auburn, and the fact is, Auburn's probably the best one of all of them historically. That brings us to another thing I wanted to talk about, which is just how good is the Auburn job.
Yep.
And I'll tell you my opinion, and your opinion is probably more valuable, Ronnie. My opinion is one of the best jobs because I think people make the mistake of saying, well, this job is not that good a job. Look, they've had 3 straight losing seasons. I really don't think that's what it's about at all. I think it's about resources, about fan support, about being able to recruit, and about having a history that says you can win. And I think Auburn has all those things. Is it the best job in the country? No, it's not the best job in the country, but it's one of. And I don't know that, I think Tennessee's a good job, and they went 20 years without doing anything to speak
Yep.
of.
And I personally think Auburn's a better job.
LSU before Nick Saban got there had 7 losing seasons in 11 years.
And cycled through as many coaches as Alabama did during,
Right. Alabama before Saban got there, they were in trouble.
Bad trouble.
And so what if I'm a coach, and I think coaches probably look at it this way, Ronnie, you can tell me otherwise. I want to know if that school's got those things a lot more than I want to know how good they were last year.
Yeah, and like you say, I mean, in Georgia, I'm not sure before Kirby got there, they were committed, but were they really committed?
Yeah,
I think, and I'm not sure that they knew how to be committed either before Kirby got there. But I mean, I think you look at the Auburn job, and Suge Jordan won a national championship. Obviously, Barfield didn't, but Dye got screwed out of at least one. Won 4 conference championships. Terry won his first 20 games, 11-0. So.
Chizik won the national championship. Gus played for a national championship. Now, what Auburn has not been able to do.
Tuberville got screwed out of one too. So, I mean, everybody who's been there except Brian Harsin has either been undefeated, played for a national championship, won an SEC championship, or won a national championship, or both.
Right. Well, the thing Auburn has not been able to do is put those kinds of seasons, not necessarily a champion, not even just a championship season, but contending seasons back to back to back to back. They have not been able to do that. And that's why I think the easy thing for Hugh Freeze to have done would have been to have come in here and said, I don't have enough players, which he didn't, and we're not going to worry about freshmen. We're going to the transfer portal and go and spend every dime he had in NIL money on transfers. But I don't believe that's, as you look at Florida State, I mean, I don't believe that's the way to build a program to last. I think the way to build a program to last is to do exactly what he's doing, which is recruiting like crazy.
And I agree with you, Phillip. I think that the way he's doing it, I know people are frustrated right now, but let's not forget this is game 4 of year 2, and I don't think that people really. You've written about it. We've talked about it on the message boards. We've all talked about it on podcasts, everything else. I still don't think people realize how bad a shape the program was in.
It is. And somebody asked me this question on the message board: Who inherited the worst roster, Dye or Freeze? And it's not even close.
No.
And you have to remember Doug Barfield finished number 16 in the country the year before he was fired. He recruited a lot of really good players. And a lot of those players, I think 8 of them, maybe 8 or 9, were starters on Auburn's SEC championship defense. I mean, he inherited a lot of guys. And but what Freeze inherited, what Brian Harsin did to this team, it's just incredible, really, to this program, I should say. It's just incredible. I mean, it's you lost 30-some odd players, didn't you? Right, I think. And
then off Bo Nix.
Lost Bo Nix, the epitome of an Auburn guy. And according to erstwhile Jason Caldwell, who knows all, I haven't counted it, but he said Auburn's got 16 players left from the ones that Freeze inherited. And I counted it up myself. Like 47 of their scholarship players are either freshmen or redshirt freshmen. That's well over half your team.
Mhm.
That in itself is not conducive to winning a bunch of games. It's just not. And and Jarquez Hunter is the only player left from his recruiting class. The only one guy. I don't know that I've ever heard of that.
Yeah. It's not
Now,
like he's a fifth-year
but here's
senior.
the thing. They say, well, it's different now because you got the transfer portal. And that's true. So should Hugh Freeze have not signed some of these really, really talented freshmen he signed to go sign a quarterback that could maybe make him win 8, 9, 10 games? He could have. But what does that say about the future of where the program's headed?
Well, and would it have
Sorry,
worked?
Nathan, you were
Well,
about to say.
when signing all those guys, do you win? I mean, look, Auburn had a chance to win 9 games last year. Kind of pissed it
Yep.
away.
Yep.
But I mean, outside of obviously Auburn made some mistakes last year. Should have won more games than they won. But I think that again, the New Mexico State game was inexcusable, and then the Alabama game was just unfathomable. But but that being said, I think if you look at what Hugh Freeze walked into, and I'm not going to say he did a terrific job last year, but to get to a bowl game after the mess that he inherited, I talked to someone in the building who came in with Freeze after he got the job. And this is a few months after they'd been there, and I said, "So tell me about what you inherited." And he said, "Not one thing in this building worked right. Not one department functioned properly." And he said not that there wasn't anything that worked well. He said, "You would think that, after having been here, almost 2 years, that, the guy could have done something right." And everybody in the building hated him. So, I mean, Brian Harsin is the antithesis of what Auburn's about. And
I know. I thought my feeling was at his introductory press conference was that this guy is not a fit for Auburn. But I didn't know just how bad a fit he would be. It's hard for me to. I mean, he was successful at Boise, who in that league is the recruiting power in that league. I mean, guys that don't go to the Pac-12, that's where they go.
Mhm.
And or the former Pac-12, now the Pac-2. But what I witnessed Brian Harsin do at Auburn has no chance for success. Zero. When you tell an assistant coach, quote, "I don't worry about recruiting. We'll out-coach the guys in this league." His words. Secondhand, but I absolutely believe it.
I was told the same thing. I know exactly what you mean. I heard the same thing, and
And
it's
if you
one of
think
the reliable sources
you
you can
can
get.
come in the SEC and recruiting doesn't matter, you're in a bad, bad way.
So,
Nathan, you were about to say something earlier.
I was just going to say, now it reaches a point, I feel like, for Freeze where you can't. I mean, there is, I think, a little bit of the leash because of everything that you guys are talking about. But at the same time, if you lose your first 2 power games of the season here, like this Arkansas game to me feels like as important of a game as Freeze has coached at Auburn.
It's important, but I guess
you don't want to get off on this foot this season.
I would disagree with you about the leash. I don't think
I'm not saying he's going to get fired or anything like that.
Right.
I'm just saying what was left over from Harsin, people having that goodwill and just saying,
Yeah.
well, everything was bad. That can't last forever. He wouldn't get fired. That's all I'm saying.
But I think that if I was giving fans advice, and they don't want my advice, that's for sure, but I would say enjoy the games and let it play out. I mean, you gotta think they'll get better over the course of the season. And maybe they'll be good enough to beat Arkansas, and maybe they won't. But then maybe they'll beat Oklahoma. I think people put way too much stock. Let me tell you something. If Auburn had to score with 3 minutes left to get rid of UAB, I promise you, and I don't know what Arkansas fans are saying, but I know what our Auburn fans would be saying. They'd be saying, there's no chance we beat Arkansas. No chance. But every single game is different. Every game. And if you don't play well, you can lose.
Well,
and that's the only reason Auburn's not 3-0. They didn't play well.
And Freeze was talking about that today. The last year's blowout in Arkansas, he was like, look, sometimes you just snowball. Like, I don't think anyone would really say Auburn was, maybe they were 38 points better than Arkansas last year, but I'm not.
No,
not on the road, but he was, what you said, Phillip. Every game is, you never know what's going to happen on Saturday.
The very next week after that inspirational blowout of Arkansas, they lost to New Mexico State.
Correct. Never know.
And it wasn't close.
Well, Phil, I think it, and again, I think it was you and me that talked about it, but last week Georgia beat Kentucky by 1 point, and I was texting with a friend of mine. I think it was about the end of the first quarter, and I said Kentucky's going to beat Georgia, and and they had plenty of chances, but Kirby said after the game coming off the field, he said, "This is what it's like to play in the SEC." He said, "If you don't show up and play every week," he said, "Look, Kentucky looked terrible last week." He said, "They've got players, and they're a pretty good football team." And he said, "Just because somebody had a bad week, he said we're fortunate to win this game," and they were.
Kevin Steele told me, who was last year was the defense coordinator at Alabama, because Auburn played, I guess, Alabama right after New Mexico State, didn't they? Yes. He said, I was worried going in because there was no convincing these guys after that game, the New Mexico State game, that Auburn could beat them. So there was no convincing them.
Well,
and Auburn, by all rights, should have won that game. I mean, they had it won. They played better except for one play.
And 2 years earlier too, with a one-legged quarterback. Who wasn't very good. It's.
But anyway, back to the original premise here. I think Auburn's a really good job, but I think you have to be especially when you inherit it in the shape it was in when you came here. I think you got to approach it. If you want to build a program that he has convinced you can build, that is consistently among the best teams in the league, that you have to do it the way he's doing it. You can't do it. Okay, we loaded up on transfer portal this year, and now we got to go load up on the transfer portal again. I mean, Michigan State with Peyton Thorne at quarterback with 11-2, wasn't it? They went 11-2, and they hadn't been any good since because they had all those transfers. Deion Sanders living on transfers, and I think that he also has two great players. I mean, he has two difference makers, two great players, and but and now all's right with the world. But I kind of think that it's getting a little carried away because it beat Colorado State. But I just don't think you can do it long term with a transfer portal. I think that Norville at Florida State, I think he got caught up in the transfer portal, and now he's gone from being 13-0 to having a team that's sure looks like one that's going to win by 3 or 4 games.
I think Lane Kiffin's probably mastered the portal.
He's done it better than anybody, but can he sustain it?
No,
I don't know.
Not at all.
He's got a great quarterback. He's got a great. What he's got is what you with at quarterback is what you need out of the transfer portal. An outstanding player who's got years left to play.
Yep.
To sign a one and done guy he better just do that because Miami's got a great quarterback now, and then next year they'll be looking for another one.
And there's not going to be a great one to sign every year that you can get.
No, and but anyway, that's one old man's opinion.
Yeah, my opinion, as far as how good a job is Auburn, I think it's a great job. I've thought about this a lot over the years. I think somewhere between, nationally, somewhere between 8 and 12. Depending on, depending on
money, make a lot of money, make a lot of money if you flock. But you can, of course, that's true everywhere. You get the money you need to hire the kind of coaches you need. You get the money to recruit. You get the money to hire other staff. You got one of the best facilities in the country.
And you may have the best fan base. Honestly, you may have the best.
Yeah, they grumble, but they are always there.
They're always there.
Yeah, somebody on an Arkansas podcast asked me this week. I thought it was a really good question. They were saying they hadn't been to Auburn in a while. And they said, so how's that atmosphere been? Because, back when, talking about previous years. And my answer was, look, I think it's both encouraging and frustrating to people because I think the atmosphere has been phenomenal, even with these losing seasons. But you have the other side of that where people get a little tired of hearing about how great their atmosphere is because they'd rather just start winning some football games.
What tells me the most about that is the atmosphere they had for Alabama A&M and New Mexico.
Yep.
New Mexico in the rain.
Cal was an incredible pregame atmosphere. The game just kind of took people out of it about a quarter and a half in. That's going to happen. They'll have another. Saturday it'll be everything you want.
People are smart. They know they know. It's SEC time now. Every one of these games is huge. It's 8 out of the next 9 games.
Yep.
But you talk about every week being different. The week before UAB took Arkansas right to the nitty gritty, they got beat 32-6 by Louisiana Monroe,
who has nothing. They had their roster is just shot.
And I looked at the stats from that game, and they just ran all over them. They didn't pass for many yards at all. They just ran and ran and ran.
Did you see, Phillip, the story about UAB's security and Bryant Vincent? Did you see that?
No, I did not.
It's like the big security guys that walk the coach out. There is a video of them. They see Bryant Vincent, who was obviously the interim at UAB, and they passed over him to hire Trent Dilfer. They see him and they get really excited and they go give him a hug before they usher Trent Dilfer off the field. I'm like, man, that's brutal. That's brutal. That's just really brutal.
They led Bryant Vincent to believe at UAB that he had a real shot to get that job. He didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not a great situation over there either. It's going to be interesting to see how that whole thing plays out.
Yeah,
it's never been a great situation there. It just never has. It's
better than it's been, but still not great. But.
Well, and it's funny how things happen, and I'm sure you know this. Jimbo was on his way to UAB,
100%,
and Paul Bryant Jr. nixed it.
Yep.
And where would Jimbo have gone if he'd gone to UAB?
Say that again.
What he wanted to do.
I'm sorry.
I said, which he wanted to do. He wanted the job, Jimbo.
He did. He called me, and we were talking every day, 2, 3, 4 times a day. And he thought he had the job, and he called me. He said, all right, what do you need? Do you want to go? I said, yeah, I want to go. We were ready to go.
So he was an LSU assistant at this time, Ronnie?
I'm trying to remember.
Was he there in Cincinnati?
He wasn't Cincinnati. He had to be at LSU.
I was going to say, if he was with you,
he was at Florida State. How long was he at Florida State? Even before he was coaching Florida State.
He was an assistant for 3 years at Florida State.
I'd have to look back and see what year that.
When Southern Miss opened, and I was there at Southern Miss. I went into the AD's office after we got fired that morning, and he called me in. And he said, "What would you do about recruiting?" We talked about that, and he said, any coaches you think would be good for this job. And the first name I gave him was Jimbo's, and gave him Jimbo's number. And when I mentioned Jimbo's name, he's like, "That's who." He told me, he said, "That's who I want." And they go offer the job to Jimbo, and Jimbo promptly turns around and uses it for leverage to get the head coach in waiting title at Florida State.
I just obviously looking at it from the outside, I think you got a lot better chance if you're an assistant at a highly successful program than if you go somewhere where it's really, really hard to win. Because I know these coaches think, well, it won't be, I can do it. Even if nobody else can do it, I can do it. And they usually find out that they can't do it either. And then it becomes a lot harder to move up the ladder. Well,
there's a reason that other people have not won at ULM and some of these other places. I mean, there's a lot of times it's like I was talking to Ron Zook not long ago, and I think we talked about this on the podcast the other day, but I think once Billy's fired at Florida, I think it'll be including interims, like 12 coaches since Spurrier left, or so 11 or 12 coaches since Spurrier left. And again, that's counting interims. But Zook told me, he said, hell, maybe it's not always a coach down there.
Yeah, that's an amazing thing. I know a lot of the fans are convinced they can get Kiffin. I'm not convinced they can.
Did you see Ronnie? Did you see the stat about the games at Ben Hill Griffin? No. It was like Spurrier lost 5 games at home as the coach, which is just insane. But it's like since he left, they've lost like 49 games at home or something like that. I mean, it's just, he left a long time ago, but it's still, it's still crazy. And that's with Urban in there.
Well, and Urban came in. We really thought, the year we got fired, we thought we were going to have a really good chance to win the national championship next year. And Urban came in and really kind of pissed away about 3 or 4 games, or 3 games, I think, if I remember right. And next year they did win the national championship. But we really,
but then in the end, it went to crap with him too.
Well, and that's what happens when you're and look at Ohio State. The culture in the building when you've got rapists and murderers running around everywhere, probably not a great culture to have if you don't want it to crash and burn.
Yeah, it's crazy, but we'll see what happens Saturday. I picked Auburn 31-27. I could just as easily have picked Arkansas 31-27. I don't know. The matchups to me, I think their defenses are probably pretty similar. So can Auburn do more against Arkansas's defense than Arkansas can do against Auburn's defense? So that's the question to me. And if they were playing in Fayetteville, I would say probably not. But playing at Auburn, I think there's a good chance Auburn will be able to do it. But I won't be shocked if they're not.
It's a question to me too, Phillip, of what you're going to get from their quarterback.
Yeah.
He's been up and down. His highs have been really high this season, but even in that Oklahoma State game where they played so well, he had some moments. And then against UAB, I think he was 11 of 26 against UAB. So it just depends on what Auburn can do to slow him down.
Yep, I agree.
Well, Phillip, we've enjoyed it.
Yes, always.
We appreciate everybody for tuning in this